Explorations. Today we're speaking with Sam Magill. Sam is an old friend and a photographer, a poet, a philosopher, a coach, and a coach supervisor, and has made a living of experiencing life firsthand and using stories and images to support leaders and coaches in their own journeys. In this first of a four-part conversation, Sam describes what he calls the poetics of coaching. He sees the coaching encounter as a living experience that shares many of the properties of what occurs when we encounter a painting, a work of art, or the symbolic images that emerge from a poem. So let's get to it. Well, it's so great to welcome you, Sam, to Explorations, and I have a feeling the conversation we're going to be having today is a continuation of a conversation that's probably been going on for a few years. And some of it started on our dining room table here when you came here a couple of years ago as you began working on some concepts and ideas for a book. So it's exciting to have you here. So thanks for taking an hour out of your day to join Explorations.
I've been looking forward to it. Yes, it is a continuation of many conversations. One just doesn't know exactly where it will go.
Well, we'll see. You know, one of the things that fascinated me when we first began talking about this, you had developed a concept. You called it Poetics of Coaching, the Poetics of Coaching, and I just found that so enticing and engaging. Tell us a little more about what you mean when you say the Poetics of Coaching.
Yeah. Well, the whole coaching world to me takes itself a little bit too seriously. And there's a real danger in that. I mean, it is serious, whether it's coaching a person who's coming out of a traumatic period of life and creating a vision for herself, for a young person who's been trapped in a particular mindset and coaching to envision that life is possible, or an executive who's faced with making really hard choices. It is serious. And yet there's an aspect of it that can become so pedantic and transactional. Even the quality of the questions asked can become formulaic. And I think there's more to it than that. So this notion of poetics of coaching invites us to bring in artistry to touch into a different part of our humanity by inviting people into a living conversation. I was in a meeting with some folks in France earlier this week. And of course, I was there by Zoom. Don't get to think that I was in France, unfortunately. And the notion of ethics, we were talking about coaching ethics in that case. And one guy said, oh, so you're talking about living ethics, ethics live, he called it. And that's what I'm about here. And because I think that when we engage in poetry or other forms of art, it's always a living experience. And I'm interested in the living encounter. What is happening right now? Even if I'm looking at a painting that was done 1,000 years ago, the encounter with it is living. It's right now.
You have, for as long as I know you, you have been plying your trade as a poet. You have a book of poetry out, and you're always writing poetry. And what's the role poetry has played for you personally in your life? What lens has it provided to you on your experiences, and what has it opened up within yourself?
You know, as you say that, Rick, all of a sudden I have the thought that it is a word photograph. Sounds kind of funny, but you know, we take a photograph of something, especially landscape photography or portrait photography. It's of a particular moment. It captures something. So The bulk of my poems are about something that has happened, sometimes with another person, but more often something in me. For example, when it was snowing here in Seattle last week, I pulled out an old poem that I wrote sitting in a hotel in Bern, Switzerland, looking out at the snow falling. And the opening line came to me, and I said, "How like our lives the snowflakes fall."
Beautiful. That's quite beautiful. It strikes me that in a poem, and in just a line of a poem such as that, we can capture so much nuance that could never be captured in the linearity of language and the rationality of our world. There's nothing rational about that. It taps into something much deeper.
Oh, yeah. And as I was anticipating this delicious conversation, I was drawn to a poem by Delmore Schwartz called The Kingdom of Poetry. And he wrote this: "For poetry magnifies and heightens reality. Poetry says of reality that it is magnificent. It is also stupid. For poetry is, in a way, omnipotent." We're able to say things in a poetic voice that are hard to say directly. And it's almost like in our peripheral vision, we can see things that we can't see when we look directly. And in fact, you know that the eye is structured such that when we're looking at a night sky, seeing the stars behind you, we can often see things, the rods, I guess, I forget which it is. Anyway, the parts of the eye that are in the periphery pick up black and white better, and some details that looking straight at an object doesn't pick up.
So in some ways, poetry is like our eyes at night, is that it has a way of perceiving things that are there, but often missed. When we're looking directly at something or taking on I've got this problem at work, I can't get along with my supervisor, or I can't get along with the person underneath me. And we break it down into nice little, well, you should do the following 3 things to build a relationship, but there's something more going on there than what meets the eye, as they often say, huh?
Yeah, like just this morning, I was with a coaching supervision group. And these are all very talented, very advanced coaches, both personal and corporate coaches. I mean, dealing with big stuff. And we weren't quite sure where to start. So I said, well, I'm thinking of a friend of mine who is a drama director and a coach. And one day I asked him what drama is, and he said it's relationship, circumstance, and intention. So we talked a little bit more about that in the group. And I said, how about if each of you write a play right now about your coaching, about you, about a client, and so on. So people had 10 minutes to write, free writing. And the diversity of images was just amazing. And the creativity, and exactly as you're saying, people began to see nuances in their work when they simply imagined it as a play, as standing on a stage in some cases. Another person converted it to a dance. And what kind of dance was it? Well, then we get the creative parts of our minds going, and we see things that we don't see directly with our higher executive function in the forehead.
Mm-hmm. Harkening back to the poem that you were just talking about. It looks like my camera's having trouble. Here I am.
There you are.
There I am. I was out of focus because I was so absorbed in what you were talking about. But I'm thinking about this notion of the line was seeing reality in all of its magnificence. Is that the way the line went? Repeat the line.
Yeah, it said, poetry says of reality that if it is magnificent, it is also stupid.
Mm. Yeah. Reality is a little overrated sometimes. Yeah, but in some ways we often undersee reality, underrated. And I'm thinking of a coach who is sitting with a client, whether it's on Zoom or face to face, and and to be able to see this person across from you, and almost through sacred eyes, to see that you have another human being who is perhaps hurting, struggling, but has all these other dimensions to them that only seen with poetic eyes can you begin to maybe see it metaphorically about what their struggle is, what the symbolic quality of it is. And maybe that's the other thing. I was talking to Terrence Deal yesterday, who's written a lot on story and culture and organization. And he talks about the symbolic frame. There are various frames through which we look at organizations. And one that's we often don't look through it is through a symbolic frame. And I think that's what poetry does. Would you not agree with that?
I couldn't agree more. And not just poetry, but art in general.
Right.
And one of my favorite images to use when I'm talking about the poetics of coaching is Picasso's Girl Before a Mirror. And here are these two images. There's one presumably in the mirror, and there's another person looking at the mirror. And as we begin to encounter that, we wind up saying, well, wait a minute, there are several different stories about the person looking into the mirror. And so I use this to say, so before you make some kind of assessment of the person you're looking at across the table or on the Zoom screen, you better check in to see what the story is that you're operating from yourself. Because we live in stories about ourselves as coaches. We live in stories about our clients. And if we're skillful, together we create a story about the living encounter right then, together.
Yeah. And it strikes me that if a coach is not aware of the story that they personally live within, that they will be terribly handicapped when they're in that encounter with the other.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of one of my photographs. It's of a sunrise with fog and a hill in the California wine country near Santa Barbara. And there's an oak tree sort of shrouded in some morning mist. And I took that photograph to a professional photographer one day. And he looked at it and said, oh, lovely, lovely composition, so on and so on and so on. And then he said over on the left side of it, why did you cut off the oak tree? I said, what? He said, well, you chopped off part of the oak tree. Why'd you do that? I said, oh, shoot. I was working so fast because I liked the light the way it was, and pretty soon it was going to be gone when the sun came up a little bit or the fog dispersed. I didn't check to see if I had the whole picture.
So this is what you call the distinction between a snapshot and more of intentional photography. Is that the distinction you're making here?
I think that works. I think it works really well.
So how is it that we take snapshots and we miss the whole picture? What keeps us? Is it just unconsciousness?
Well, let's say you've got 4 executive coach meetings coming up this morning, one after another with 5-minute bio break in between, right? And you're looking at your watch and you're looking at your schedule, and the executive is late for a meeting, and you're taking snapshots of that person's life. Click, 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 click. What's on your mind? What do you want to discuss? They respond in a big hurry. Okay, what are your options for pursuing this in a better way than you did before? Okay, time's up. Let's go.
Hmm.
You can do that out taking pictures. You can do that writing a poem or painting a beautiful image. Or you can step back and say, what's really going on here? What's really going on? I had an executive coaching client years and years ago who was troubled. He said, I don't think the vice presidents of this organization are telling me the truth about their operations. And he wasn't saying it in an accusatory way. It was a great worry for him. And he said, I want you to find out why. And I went and interviewed them. I know them pretty well, but boy, the door was shut and we were taking time to say, what's going on here? And I went back and met with him. And he said, what did you find out? And I said, well, they're afraid to tell you the truth. Why would they be afraid of telling me the truth? I respect every one of them. I said, do they know that? Well, they should. Our conversation was over. I went back to my office. A few minutes later, I got a call from him. He said, I just realized something. What's that? I thought acknowledgement was something that you did for children. When my kids were growing up, he was a great dad, wonderful human being. When my kids were young and they did something wonderful, I made sure they knew that I saw that. I didn't realize adults need that too. And he went to work acknowledging these fine people. It changed the atmosphere. He made it a beautiful image. He brought in the artistry of relationship and humanity because he took the time to do it. That's not snapshot photography.
Right. Yeah, that's holographic photography.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, really seeing it through all dimensions and maybe with your infrared filter on as well, seeing things that the normal eye doesn't see.